Let's have the conversation if Seattle picked it too, right? Because I don't think we've done this since maybe we did a mock draft. Or I think one of the only mock drafts, or maybe the only mock draft we did before the season started. And a lot of our conversations were focused around the idea of Seattle needing a franchise quarterback. And nobody saw this kind of significant progress from Geno Smith this year. And I feel pretty comfortable thinking that Seattle's going to do everything they can to keep Geno there for a long time. I don't know what that contract will look like. Will it be a Ryan Tannehill level contract? Will it be smaller? We don't know. But it's enough for me, Trevor, to think that if they had the number 2 overall pick in the draft, it would not be on a quarterback because they feel pretty good about the guy they have under center.
Mm-hmm.
And then it raises the question of what do they look to do? They made significant investments in the offensive line in last year's draft. It worked out really well. To pair that, they have Kenneth Walker running behind them, who's been banged up this year, but really good when healthy. I look at this Seattle team and think them picking number 2 overall is a dream scenario in this draft because what they need is help up front in the form of a Will Anderson, Jalen Carter. I think I would campaign harder for Will Anderson. They've missed on a couple edge rushers in previous years, but they've never had the opportunity to draft one with the skill set of Will Anderson.
But they do have Boye Mafe, right? And
sure,
Mafe, not that that's the reason why you didn't. You don't pick Will Anderson, but Mafe, I'm looking up his mock draftable right now. So he's 6'3", 260. It's actually bigger than I thought. I didn't think he was going to be 260. Was he lighter at Minnesota? He had to have been lighter at Minnesota. Where am I getting this from? Let me see. I'm talking out loud here on my own podcast.
He's just so twitchy at that size that he never looks 260 plus.
I know. Maybe I just thought he was leaner. Okay, Minnesota does not have the height and weight on the bio. What are we doing?
I've noticed that with a couple schools this
I know you're going to lie to me anyways, but come on, give me something here. So, all right, I thought that Mafe was a little bit lighter, so I was saying to myself, like, oh, well, are they going to want 2 light edge guys? Maybe that would steer them away from it. But here we go. Let me throw out a scenario to you, Connor.
Okay.
Will Anderson would be a phenomenal pick, I think, for the Seattle Seahawks. Jalen Carter, Georgia defensive lineman, also would be a phenomenal pick for the Seattle Seahawks. Trade back from number 2. Now, I wonder what the quarterback market's going to end up being, how strong of a prospect CJ Stroud is, how strong of a prospect Will Levis is. I don't think we're going to get to this point, but how strong of a prospect Anthony Richardson would be, right? I'm just spitballing. If the quarterback market is strong enough at number 2 overall, trading back could look very tempting for Seattle. And my question to you is, does how much they nailed last draft from the very top to what it feels like the very bottom give them faith to say, okay, we'd be passing on Will Anderson or Jalen Carter, but we have faith in our scouting staff, in the guys that we like, in the board that we set up to think that we could drop back from, say, 2 to 8, get an extra first-round pick next year or whatever it's going to be, still love the player we're going to get at number 8 and love the rest of the draft that we're going to have as well, because I believe they have 2 second-round picks too. So does last year's draft success go into the temptation of trading down from number 2 overall if you're Seattle? What do you think?
I say no. And the reason I say no is because I think this defense needs some stars. And I think you get to the point of the draft where quickly on the defensive side of the ball, that you run out of the territory where you're not getting blue chippers anymore. And I agree with you, Trevor. They have found really nice players, Tariq Woolen included. I don't know if Tariq Woolen is going to be a star. He's definitely been one of the better rookies in this class, and he looks like he can absolutely become one on a down-by-down basis. For me, I just would not pass up one of Anderson or Carter for this front. And I get it. You make a compelling case. They can get a ton of picks, but they've had a lot of picks, and we'll see what they do in free agency as well and how that impacts that. But I just look at this front once again that they're interesting, right? You brought up a Boye Mafe, Darrell Taylor, who has quite a few strip sacks this year. They have Poona Ford in the middle, who's a big space-eating kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
I think they need the dude. I think they need a wrecker, and I think that comes in the form of one of those two guys, depending on how they view the development of their young edges, or just how they grade the players as a whole between Carter and Anderson. But for Seattle, for me, I think they're actually at the point of the roster where they just need that household name on defense, and it would be staring them right in the face.
And I think that that's totally fair. I think I'd be more tempted than it sounds like you are to take the chance on it, especially if it's a quarterback that somebody is trading up for, right? If they're moving down from number 2,
it can get crazy.
We talked about this with Chicago, I think a couple of weeks ago, how they could potentially control the draft. If you look at the draft order, let's say the draft were this weekend, Seattle's sitting there picking at number 2 overall. You've got Indianapolis at 7, potentially Vegas at 8, Carolina sitting there at 9, maybe Atlanta at 10. But like, those are 3, potentially 4 teams that are sitting there that would move up for a quarterback, you'd think. 2 teams for sure need one in the Indianapolis Colts and the Carolina Panthers. Those are picks 7 and 9. If you're Seattle, you could be sitting here, move down to 7, move down to 9. There's a good chance that you could get one of Brian Brzee, Miles Murphy, Jared Verse, right? Like those guys that you would really want anyways. Now, are they as good as a Will Anderson or a Jalen Carter? No, I think there's a reason why those 2 guys are going to be picked well ahead of those players. But what's the gap? Are you okay with that? If your scouts sign off on a lot of these guys, you can sit here, trade back, and especially if it's for a quarterback, get yourself extra draft capital next year. You're already seeing the dividends pay off of making a deal to get an extra first-round pick, and what that could potentially be could still be a strong first-round pick, even with these 2 teams going up to get a rookie, because it's probably not going to be Bryce Young that they're going up to get at number 2. So all of these things I think would be floating in my head of what you could potentially do in the draft. And when I think about Seattle, when I think about how they nailed it with so many prospects last year, having faith in that staff to get those guys back in and continuing to stockpile picks, man, the draft, first and foremost, is about getting good football players on your football team. Okay. The higher you pick, the better chance you have at that. But it is still a bit of a crapshoot, and something that I love about the draft is it's also a game. It's a chess game. It's a long game as much as it is a short-term game too. So you never want to outthink yourself. You don't want to play yourself, if you will. But if I'm Seattle and they're picking number 2 when it's all said and done, I'd be real tempted, given how much success they had last year in the draft, to move down and get some extra draft capital.
Never hurts, especially answering the phone and seeing teams bid against each other and see how much you could squeeze out of it to move a certain amount of spots. I look at Pete Carroll. He's going to be 72 years old next year coaching in the NFL. I think I would just want that superstar. And you just go with your evaluations, right? If you think Jalen Carter or Will Anderson are going to be all pro players, some of the best players at their position, I think you sit there and take them. If you think they're above average players and the next guy is closer to them than you expected, then you think about moving back and just stockpiling an entire roster. So it's tricky, right? It's the ebbs and flow of the draft and what you need, and volume versus quantity versus quality, of course, and how that ultimately shakes out. So I think ultimately my takeaway is, and I've said this on the Sunday night show when I said Seattle's really not going to go anywhere with this defense. It's hard not to love how Seattle has positioned themselves when things looked kind of grim after the Russell Wilson trade and Jamal Adams trade that wasn't really the best look for their GM in terms of what they gave up and the money they gave him, and he's fact he got hurt. So I think Seattle's in a really, really unique position for success going forward.